for me if you don't mind.
Go ahead and just stick my mic up there already. You just be ready to go right after for me to go.
That's up to you.
Could you mic check for me?
Yeah, Ben Raymond, Chief of Police, Shreveport Police Department, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, man.
Do you mind just to knock it out real
No,
fast?
you good.
Thank you.
What are your biggest concerns about the amount of shootings and homicides recently in Shreveport?
How to address them. If you look at the trend for an increase in shootings and homicides, you'll see that it's a national trend. It's something that we started to face as a nation shortly after we started to recover from the early effects of COVID. So March and April into May of last year, crime just about came to a halt when the entire nation, and even locally, we pretty much shut down. As we came out of that, we started to see drastic increases in violence. Many cities saw the highest violent crime rates they've ever seen in the history of those municipalities. So my biggest concern is why is it continuing to go up, and how do we turn that trend?
Are you getting help from witnesses who may have information to help these solve murders, or is there help from the community at all?
There is. There's not enough help. The chances of someone committing a violent crime, driving by somebody's house and shooting at the house, or getting engaged in an altercation, shooting somebody without other people knowing who did it, are slim. So if we had complete assistance from the community, we'd be solving all of them. We do have certainly people that come forward and turn in, family members, friends, witnesses that come forward, but there are a lot of these crimes that go unsolved simply because community members don't work with us.
Are there arrests being made for most of the shootings?
I would say that arrests are being made for most of the shootings. Arrests are being made for the majority of the homicides. Shootings are more difficult. A lot of our ability to make an arrest depends on what type of evidence we have at a scene, what witnesses were there, and who comes forward. So I don't have specific numbers as to the number of shootings, percentage-wise, but we are solving the majority, or in the process of solving the majority of the homicides.
Speaking of homicides, what are the homicides numbers this year compared to last year this time?
As of today, we've had 22 this year. Last year, I believe we only had 11 at this time, so it's a drastic increase. If you look back to the end of February, we were only about 10% above. February of last year was a very violent month for the city of Shreveport. March, when we entered the pandemic, was a very low crime rate for Shreveport, whereas March of this year, we've seen that continued trend of violence. So we've had a lot of homicides in March of 2021 that we did not see in March of 2020, and has those numbers skewed at this point in the year.
Do you feel that not enough manpower is part of the problem, as for the shootings?
I don't think you can contribute the number of shootings to police manpower. It's very difficult for police to prevent a shooting. I do think that it prevents us from being able to respond as we would like. I'd like to have more officers on the street. I'd like to be able to run more specialized units that are focusing on proactive enforcement and seizing weapons from the streets. We're 95 officers down now. I was about to say 105, but we did graduate a cadet class about 3 weeks ago, which is helping. But when you're triple digits down in officers, there are simply things you cannot do so that we can meet the basic police services.
Have you asked for help, or is there help from outside law enforcement agencies?
Yes, both. We ask for help. I've welcomed any law enforcement agency to come and assist with the problems within our city. Generally, the problems within the city contribute to the region. So Northwest Louisiana as a whole is going to benefit or face problems because of any crime in Shreveport. And we have a lot of assistance. We have the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office that supports us in a couple of different task forces. We have officers assigned to all of the federal agencies that are represented. I had a meeting just yesterday with U.S. Attorney Alec Van Hook and Caddo District Attorney James Stewart, and we discussed some trends and things that we can do to improve upon investigations and prosecution. I speak just about weekly to Louisiana State Police, Shreveport City Marshals. So we have a close relationship with many of the law enforcement agencies represented in our area, and they are assisting.
That's it for me.
Do you want us to go next, or?
Yeah, no, let her, since
You go.
y'all go ahead, because
Let me know if this is in your. Okay. Okay. Good.
As you mentioned, Shreveport PD investigated 22 homicides so far. This year, the latest victim, a 5-year-old little girl who was not the intended target. What would you say to parents who are worried for their children's safety in this city?
You know, and it's difficult. I don't have words. I'm a parent myself. You know, there's nothing that someone could tell me if I were to lose my child. So I'm not going to even, or there's nothing somebody's going to tell me to make me not, you know, be concerned about the safety of my children. I like to speak about facts and statistics. So that's about the best way I think I can answer your question. If you look at the 22 homicides we've had in Shreveport this year, 68% of them, based on our investigations, indicate that the individuals who were killed were involved in some type of criminal activity or gang activity. And I'm not going to cite specific instances. 68% of them. 18% of them, we believe, were instances of self-defense. Ultimately, the district attorney's office determines whether a shooting was justified or not. But our investigations led us to believe that 18% of them were justified self-defense shootings. 9% of them were domestic related. So the numbers I just gave represent about 85% of those 22 homicides. So I think the message is that if you're not involved in criminal activity and gang activity, short of domestic incidents, which can affect anybody, unfortunately, the chances of you being involved in violent criminal activity are very slim, very low. I think the concern, obviously, is when you have a completely innocent 5-year-old. She was innocent and her family was completely innocent. I want to say that. They weren't in the wrong place at the wrong time. A child wasn't brought to an incident that a child should not have been brought to. It was a completely innocent family that was stricken by violence. But that is a rarity. And that is the one thing I can say factually, is that's not what's happening on a weekly basis. There's a lot of times when a shooting goes out or homicide goes out, and I hear information being put out by the media, no fault of the media, or on social media by citizens that talk about how it's unsafe to do this and how it's unsafe to do that. You can't even drive down Interstate Shreveport without getting shot. And what I want to do is come out and say, well, let me give you some factual information about the reason, this shooting occurred. But we're not able to do that. We have to wait and let the case work through the investigative process and allow it to be presented to the DA's office and allow them to prosecute the case without a lot of information being put out by us. But the city is not unsafe, and you shouldn't be, you can't live your life in constant fear of the what-ifs.
Can you tell us the latest on what SPD has been able to gather from the gangs in the city?
That they're still active. We have, organizations, and some people get upset when I use the word gang. And I do want to clarify that, the definition of a gang has been defined by the federal government. There are several things that have to be met in order for the federal government's going to classify someone as a gang. When I use the gang, I'm a little more loose about it. An organization, a group of friends that are involved in some type of criminal activity, right? Whether that be dealing drugs, stealing firearms, controlling a neighborhood by violence or force, armed robbery. There's a number of things that I'll classify as a gang. We still have gang activity. We do still have groups of individuals feuding with other groups of individuals. A lot of times it is associated around neighborhoods where people grew up, family ties, things like that. What's beneficial for the majority of citizens is a lot of the violence is directed at one of those groups towards another. So if you're not involved in the drug network, if you're not trying to buy and sell stolen firearms, if you're not trafficking stolen goods, your chances of being involved in violent crime greatly decrease.
Would you say a lot of the shootings in the city are retaliatory shootings?
I don't know that I would use the word a lot, but certainly there are some. And understand, too, that retaliatory shooting doesn't necessarily occur the week after the contributing factor, right? So we have shootings that we're working this year, and our investigators, give me updates fairly often that say this stemmed from this incident in 2019, all right, or it stemmed from an incident in 2020, right? So people don't forget, right? Talking about holding grudges and things like that. Retaliatory shootings don't necessarily occur back to back to back. These are ongoing feuds. Think of the Hatfield-McCoy in some instances. Group A doesn't like Group B because they grew up in that manner. They just know they're not supposed to like Group B. So these are actually things that can occur for generations.
With these shootings, although there may be an intended person, people within the vicinity could potentially be in trouble. For example, that innocent little 5-year-old girl who just passed away.
Yes.
Going back to my initial question with, is Shreveport a safe city? There are people, although you can look at the statistics, they are genuinely scared to drive on the interstate, afraid that maybe a stray bullet may enter their car, that they may be the next unintended victim. What do you want to say to those people?
I can't tell you that those things don't occur. Obviously they occur. But they occur throughout the nation, throughout the world. We are a safe city. Now, my definition of the word safe and the person sitting next to me's definition of the word safe may be from different backgrounds. But I can tell you, and I've used this analogy before, and I hate to go back to it, but I'm going to. In 1993, when I was running the streets as a teenager, this city had 22,000 Part 1 crimes, and we had 86 homicides that year. But I didn't know it. And I'm not going to say my parents didn't know it because they watched the nightly news. My dad watched the news at 5 and at 10 every night. Whatever was put out in the news at 5 and 10, my parents knew about. And whatever I happened to catch, I knew about. But we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Instagram, you didn't have social media, so we didn't know every time somebody was shot, every time a business was robbed, every time somebody was killed. But I can tell you, statistically, we're safer now than we were when I was running the streets as a teenager. And I never thought about a stray bullet striking me and killing me. I don't know that my parents put a whole lot of concern into it. It could have happened then. It can happen now. And we're doing our best to decrease those numbers. But I think the concerns that the city is off the chain unsafe, for a street term, this is violence like we've never seen before. That's not accurate. Now I will follow up in saying that it has been a violent year. Right? We have had a lot of homicides. We have had a lot of shootings. We're trying to determine why, along with a number of other agencies throughout the nation. I read articles every day to find out what other cities are facing, how they, what initiatives are they taking to reduce that violence? Are those initiatives working? So we spend a lot of our day, my command staff and I, looking at what's working, what's not working, and how do we need to redirect.
In terms of what's not working, can you tell us?
Well, apparently we're not getting enough guns off the street. As you know, my initiative, or our initiative for 2021 is let's get illegal firearms off the street. An illegal firearm in most cases being a gun that shouldn't be in the hands of the person that owns it, not that the gun itself is in any way illegal. The fact that we have had an increase in shootings in 2021, even as compared to 2020, and an increase in homicides, means that there are still too many people that are comfortable carrying a weapon, many of them being possessed illegally, because a large number of these people involved in violent crimes we've arrested before, many of them for violent crimes or for weapons violations. So this is a continuing trend of the same, in many instances, the same people. But we're aware of the problems. We are concerned about the problems, and again, we are addressing them.
TW, I need nothing.
How you doing, Chief?
I'm good. Yourself?
I'm good. I'll go get that set up there.
I didn't see you stuck in the corner over there.
I mean, we got a lot of that. Unfortunately, you were turning to that direction.
I understand. Sorry.
Direction. So, could you just start with kind of why we're here today and just a little general overview of that, and I'll pick up a couple questions.
Yeah, so there's obviously concerns, as there should be, about the increases in violence that we've seen within our city. And so I think I start out by saying that increases in violence are being seen nationwide. Shreveport is not alone in this battle. There are several cities that saw the highest violent crime rates ever recorded in 2020. And 2021 is not looking better for many of us. We're having increases in the number of shootings. We're having increases in the number of homicides. And we're pulling out all the stops and doing what we can to try to address that violence. In Shreveport, the way that we're trying to address that violence is by getting some of those weapons off the street. If the guns are not in the hands of criminals, then they can't be used to kill one another or to kill innocent people.
So, what I'm gathering from what I heard already and what you're saying now is you feel like Shreveport is as safe as it has been in relative terms in recent years, and that most of these shootings, or a lot of them, are related to people that know each other, criminal activity, so forth and so on. Occasionally, you're going to have some collateral damage. Is that a fair assessment? Can you?
Yeah, it is. So certainly, if we look at the 22 homicides we had this year, and I was pulling some of this information earlier today, based on the investigative reviews at this point, 60% of the homicides involved victims who were involved in some type of crime or gang activity. 9% were domestic, and anybody can be involved in domestic. And then 18% are what our investigators believe incidences of self-defense, which ultimately will have to be ruled on by the district attorney's office. So approximately 85% of the homicides we've seen this year fall into one of those three categories. And what I get from that, with 60% or more being stemming from criminal and gang activity, is most of us are safe as long as we're not involved in the drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, trafficking stolen goods, good upstanding citizens, living your life. Now that does not mean that every single person that was shot, first of all, nobody deserves to be killed. Let me start by saying that. What I was attempting to say is we do have innocent victims. The 5-year-old little girl is a perfect example. So I can't promise you, and I'm not going to tell you, that we're all completely safe if we're not involved in crime, because that, a shot fired misses its intended target and strikes innocent people. That happens. But, unfortunately, it happens across the nation and it happens across the world. It doesn't just happen in Shreveport. It hasn't just happened recently. I've been at a district police department for 21 years, and I can go back and pull several instances over the last 21 years where it's occurred. So that's why I think that's why we're focusing on efforts on getting those weapons off the street. Let's go back to the days where if I have a problem with somebody, let's fist fight, right? At least that way, the only person getting injured is going to be two individuals involved in that altercation. Let's move away from firing weapons at one another and go back to fistic encounters. I'd much rather deal with some fights than deal with homicides.
How frustrating is it for you, people in your department, you've been on this force for a long time, to hear things that, obviously that's the reason for this news conference, like the police aren't doing their job. Why aren't the police doing more? I think most people know with common sense, police can't stop all this stuff. You can't do ever. How frustrating is that for you guys and girls, ladies, gentlemen, to be blamed for something that you are really just trying to fight? It's got to be tough on you guys.
It is. It's extremely frustrating, to be honest with you. More so for the men and women out there on the streets that are doing their best every day to prevent crime. They're making stops. They're seizing weapons. They're making arrests. I think it must be human nature, but if something goes wrong, we got to be able to blame somebody, right? So if I didn't make the team in high school, well, it's because the coach doesn't like me, because this other guy knows his son. If I get a bad grade in school, it's because the teacher didn't like me. She wasn't a good teacher. He wasn't a good teacher, right? So we like to point blame. It's very easy. If the crime rate goes up, well, police must not be doing their job. Nobody ever says, well, maybe there are too many criminals roaming the streets. Maybe we're not doing a good job as parents. Maybe the teachers have had so much authority removed from their ability to discipline kids that when kids get out of school, they have no respect for authority. We could point fingers at a number of different places, but that doesn't do any good. I think, the better approach is let's all get together collectively and say, okay, what do we need to do now to address the problem? And there are some hardcore criminals that need to be in jail, need to be in prison. There are other people that they tiptoe in criminal activity that we could reach and turn the other direction, right? Make them contributing members of society versus the path that they could choose. And that's what we need to really decide is at what stage can we change an individual's mindset and put them on the right path, and at what point do we need to realize that this person is just hurting society and we need to get them off the street.
In the many years that you've been here and that I've been here, we've done this before. We've had the press conferences, the news conferences, the one-on-ones. is this any different? Is there anything distinguishable or different about this time that we're talking as opposed to, I think the last one, I can't remember, was in 2020. I'm sure there was one another, every time there's a spike, everybody wants to know, well, what are the police doing? What, are they going to fix the problem?
Mhm.
Is this right now any different than any of those in any distinguishable way, or is it really just the same problems flaring up once again?
I think it is different for a couple of reasons. Number one is that it's a national trend, which means that it's not something occurring in just Shreveport. So I think what we should learn from that is I can't look at what is Shreveport doing or not doing, because if it was just something occurring in Shreveport or not occurring in Shreveport, then you wouldn't have the same problem in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Baton Rouge and New Orleans. I could go on and on and on. It's a national trend, right? So there's something going on nationally. I think the pandemic is going to have a lot of contributing factors. I could tell you what a lot of the experts are saying, but 2020 into 2021, apparently we studied for the next 50 years, and there'll be a lot of good information that comes from it. Unfortunately, it'll be a little too late 10 years from now to help us out now. So that's different. It's also different the fact that we're having extreme difficulty recruiting qualified applicants, right? So that hasn't been a concern in years past. It was a concern in 2020. We started to see that road, that path in 2019 is when we began to realize we're losing more officers than we're hiring. We can't continue down the path. We're going to have problems later. In 2020, it continued. Here we are in 21, and now we're having the problems. We're having staffing problems. Officers are having to work additional hours in order to have a required amount of officers in the street. So that's different. And then the third thing I think that's certainly concerning to me is I talked about 1993. I've always been able to talk about 1993 as the highest number of homicides on record. Unfortunately, the path we're on right now, this will be the highest homicide rate on record if we can't turn that tide. That's very concerning for me.
Okay. Last thing from me, is there anything else you want to add or anything in your paperwork there that we didn't talk about that you think is important? Or did we cover it?
I think we've covered it all.
Probably
Thank you.
the chief as far as getting a message out about people still leaving guns in their car.
Okay. Yeah. Good point.
Still a problem.
Yeah.
They're not listening. So
Yeah, no, good point. Speaking to what can the community do, one of the main things is keeping their firearms out of the hands of people that don't need to possess them. And it means not leaving your weapons in your vehicle overnight, certainly not leaving your vehicles unlocked. When those weapons are in your house, lock them up, separate them from your ammunition, and know where your know where your children are, especially the teenage years. Know who their friends are, know what they're doing in school, know what they're doing after school. That's really the stage in life where parents and neighbors and pastors and authority figures can have an influence in someone's life that can really determine the outcome of their future.
Thank you.
That's it, Chief.
Appreciate it.